Good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome to our this afternoon. Strategic planning, the only way in South Essex, or TOWSY as I like to call it. I hope everyone can hear me and that you're seeing the pictures. That's great, I'm getting some nods, thank you. A particularly warm welcome, and warm both in every sense of the word, to our President, Sue Manns. Welcome to South Essex. I hope that you're wearing your virtual sunblock today.
It's a little cooler where I am, Peter, but it's still very warm.
Great. Well, I hope you will appreciate the warmth of our welcome.
I do.
And we're going to hear today from a couple of colleagues who are working on strategic planning. Mark Sheppard, who is our strategic planning team leader, and Adrian Smith, who is a senior planner working in the strategic planning team. I'll come to that in a moment. My name is Peter Geraghty. I am the Director for Planning and Transport at Southend-on-Sea Borough Council, but I'm also a member of the RTPI's East of England Regional Activities Committee, which is chartered town planners working on behalf of colleagues in the region to put on training and CPD events. So I hope those colleagues that are listening enjoyed today's session. So just a couple of housekeeping points for the moment. All your mics will be switched off, all the attendees. If anyone has a question, there is a question box in which you can write your questions. My experience with these events is that there are probably a lot more questions than we can cope with, but I hope that if I don't get to your question, you won't feel that it in any way represents the value of your question. It just tends to be that we have more questions than we can answer in the time available. We're roughly allotted around 40 minutes for the presentation. It was my intention after that to invite Sue to ask any questions she wanted to, or to share any reflections having heard the presentation, and then I'll open it up to those wider questions. Just bear in mind that today's session is being recorded and will be available on YouTube subsequently. So please think cautiously if you've got any kind of provocative statements to make. I'm sure you won't. If you do happen to be kicked off the session in terms of the IT, the best way to try and deal with that is to go back through to the link that you were sent originally and try to join again. If our speakers are kicked off, just bear in mind just to have a look at your emails and check to see that we can try and re-establish contact if that is the case. Hopefully that won't be the case in this circumstances. So just a couple of initial reflections before we open the session to Mark Sheppard. This work represents a number of years' effort on behalf of planners in South Essex, that's Southend, Thurrock, Basildon, Brentwood, Castle Point, Rochford, working closely together in collaboration with Essex County Council to take a strategic approach to planning across the areas in South Essex. When we first started this work, it was interesting that I would say there was a hostility towards strategic planning centrally. As the number of years have gone by, that's probably changed to ambivalence, then grudging acceptance, and then a support for strategic planning. And indeed, there's been changes, for example, to the MPPF to require strategic issues to be identified in plan making. So the atmosphere that we are in now in terms of strategic planning has been much more positive than it has when we started on that journey about 3 or 4 years ago. And of course, there's been a number of very recent cases in terms of joint strategic planning elsewhere in the UK, in Devon and in the West Country, where there's been a number of issues that have arisen. In South Essex at the moment, we are working very well collaboratively, and we're very encouraged by what we've been doing. And one of the things that I'm most proud of in terms of the work that we have achieved is that it's led to a wider activity and the creation of an organisation called ASALA, which is the Association of South Essex Local Authorities. Again, that's not a formal arrangement. It's authorities, the same 6 authorities with Essex, working together on a wider set of issues. But it's been very much born from the original planning work that we did a number of years ago. And planning still continues to drive the work of ASALA, which I'm particularly proud of. So, for example, we're looking at preparation of a local industrial strategy, a joint strategic plan for infrastructure, and a number of other issues on a wider basis, but very much within the context of a strategic planning framework and using strategic planning to drive that forward. And in fact, the most advanced work has been done through the planning teams across those authorities working together. So I'm particularly proud of the work that we've achieved and that we continue to achieve in terms of the last couple of years. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Mark Sheppard to start the presentation on the work that we've been doing with our fellow local authorities. And at this moment, we're going to switch off our webcams and we will follow up later with a number of questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter, and good afternoon. Yes, as Peter's described there, really, we've got a set of slides here to tell you a bit about South Essex and really the origins of the strategic planning framework that we're working towards and some of the journey we've been on and some of the reflections. So I'll take you through the slides, and then my colleague Adrian Smith will be picking up the latter half of the slides. So if we begin. So really around some context, really, following the strategic planning used to be done, for those of you who can remember the regions and the region spatial strategies. But since the abolition of regional spatial strategies and the introduction of the duty to cooperate, it's safe to assume that following that, there has been a real gap in an effective mechanism of how we can bring forward and address strategic issues. And there's been a number of papers and research that sort of highlighted that issue and actually some of the impacts that's been having around delivering at scale, addressing those strategic issues, and actually delivering the homes and the jobs that people need around the country. Having said that, there's been a number of cases throughout of where a lot of the mechanisms that were in place as part of the regional spatial strategies have carried on, albeit under the less statutory footing. There's been really three main planning models that have emerged to address these. So you have joint strategic plans, which are actually developing a statutory plan to address these issues. In combined authority areas, you can produce a similar document with more guidance from government as to spatial development strategies. Obviously, there's fewer opportunities across the country for that, less combined authorities at present. And then really what's been, it's probably the more popular at this time, has been a non-statutory framework. So growth plans, place ambitions that are non-statutory, helps coordinate local authorities across a sub-region. They have less weight and they give less confidence to the market, but you don't have an examination at the end, which is one of the real issues of getting statutory plans in place, especially around proving deliverability. But some of that is all being looked at, as I'm sure many of you as well, as part of the white paper that we'll get onto later in the slides. So a bit about South Essex, where we are. So just north of the River Thames there, east of London. It really sort of drives the connectivity across the area. So the authorities involved are Basildon, Brentwood, Castle Point, Rochford, Thurrock, and Southend. As you can see from this map here, there is some real constraints in terms of where we are located in the country around where we the river and the sea, and obviously London's a key driver to a lot of the economics in the area. If you're interested, that's the size in hectares of the authorities. Population and broadly densities, so very different densities across the areas. We're all green belt authorities, and very obviously have different different makeup in terms of urban areas, and obviously a lot more rural districts, that some of these issues are slightly different for some of the authorities. So obviously that's a form of the sort of discussion that comes out. So South Essex in numbers, it's around 750,000 population, and 350,000 jobs and business, a wealth of employment sites, primarily closer to the M25, so really dominated by Thurrock and Basildon within the wider South Essex area. There is a lot of environmental designations, especially along the coastline. So it's a real issue how we address that in terms of the strategic plan. Obviously, we have a coastline that can be a real draw, but obviously has impacts on the strategic road and rail network. There's 3 river ports, and there is an airport, Southend, London Southend Airport as well. So some of the origins of joint working. So following, I guess, the abolition of the regional spatial strategies and the winding up of the original sort of Thames Gateway, there was a sort of historic officer grouping that so planning officers and housing officers carried on meeting. It gave us a good basis to carry on having those discussions, strategic discussions, at least from an office perspective. It really gave us a footing to start to carry on looking at the strategic issues. And then there was issues with a number of the local authorities' pace of preparing a local plan, and there's threat of government intervention for a number of the authorities. And some of that really came to a head during one of the examinations, where a failure of the duty to cooperate was an outcome of that. And really that provided the catalyst to start looking afresh of how we can really address these strategic issues and actually getting outcomes from it, and making sure we have the structure and the member buy-in to deliver that. And as part of that, as Peter alluded to earlier, a sailor was really born, and the option to start delivering a joint strategic plan that was being promoted by government at the time and through the update to the MPPF. So even before we got there in terms of delivering the strategic plan, we were, like I said, we were discussing from an officer perspective a number of strategic issues. And these aren't intended to be exhaustive here, but things around housing, numbers and distribution. And the planners listed here will be well aware of the SHMARs at the time, around economic growth. So a number of evidence studies to looking at addressing that, and this has all been done really across the South Essex area, and really trying to be borderless in how we approach a lot of these evidence studies, but still giving us the detail we need to look at it from a South Essex perspective, and also for our respective local plans. Transport connectivity being a really important issue well, across the country really, but especially given South Essex geography. There's a bit of work done around the sort of the connections throughout South Essex, mainly focused on the key urban areas of sort of Basildon, Southend, Thurrock, and then also Brentwood, Castle Point, and Canby and Rochford there. Infrastructure. One of the main drivers of getting us together is really how we can address some of the lag and the gap in infrastructure delivery of some of the sites we've seen come forward at each of the local authorities. So a really important issue that we're seeking to address. And same as sort of blue and green infrastructure and how that works across the wider area. And then climate change and energy is a real big issue for the country at the moment, and clearly it needs to be done at that higher level, that higher strategic issue. And then Greenbelt will also be a really big issue, being Greenbelt authorities. So sitting alongside that, we had the Thames Gateway I say was wound up, but there was a legacy of development corporations. But government are still a priority area for government, and the Thames Estuary Commission has been set up, and the government responded to that. So I think the local authorities were very keen to influence that and government's thinking. And one of the key drivers around that is, working together with one voice. The sum of the parts is greater than the individual. I think you can see that across the country in terms of infrastructure bids and the potential devolution and the devolution white paper that's coming up. So really, in terms of a sailor, it was really looking at making sure we addressed those strategic issues, and we had that framework in place running throughout the authorities and not just from the planning side. So initially, back in 2018, you can see them quite often. MOU was agreed, and a statement of common ground. And planning was very much part of 5 main work streams, the others being place, connectivity, productivity, and investment. And really, that set out the proposal to develop the joint strategic plan that would be sitting above a higher tier plan above local plans. So it would be an important interaction. We'll get on to some of the issues with that around timing. From the off, we set ourselves quite an ambitious time scale to be complete, to have this completed by, I think I can't emphasize enough how much work goes into setting up the structures, really. So we have to be reappraised as we go through the process, but good progress has been made. And then I really established the joint officer working group and the project delivery board. I was also fortunate enough to secure some funding as part of the planning delivery grant that really has helped fund a lot of those evidence studies that I showed on another slide, and others that are needed to get the plan in place. This is a diagram which really outlines how everything knits together. So at the fore, at the top, is obviously around a vision or prospectus on how we'd like to see South Essex in the next 20, 30 years. Sitting below that, they have the number of work streams, and the joint strategic plan is very much seen as an enabler for those work streams. And sitting underneath that, you will still have the individual local plans providing the detail on how development can come forward in a coherent way that's sort of managed by that strategic plan. One of the real issues is where we are, the different authorities and where they are in the local plan making stage. So we're happy to grapple with throughout. Let's pass over to Adrian now. Adrian, do you want to take us through these slides? Adrian, you might be on mute.
Great. I hope everyone can hear me now. Yeah, we basically, the Joint Officers Group, which is sort of principal level officers from each of the authorities, we meet together most Monday mornings to discuss what we're doing. When we initially discussed how we take the plan forward, there was an overall commitment of 2 days a week of officer time from each authority. We don't have any specific sort of paid staff or anything like that, so that was identified as the way forward. So yeah, the Joint Officers Group meetings are this sort of hub of what we do, and we discuss broader Acela issues. So I think it's important to emphasise that you, when you're producing one of these documents, you don't exist in a vacuum. There is the broader context of the other work streams of the chief executives, the project delivery board, which is the senior officers of each of the authorities, and plus advisors. So that's the context in which we work, and so we discuss that, the latest evidence-based work, because what we've done is essentially split up the evidence base between different authorities and how that's managed. And at the moment, we're very much discussing issues papers and where we're going with that. Next slide, please, Mark. One thing that we wanted to get in place early on was the statement of community involvement, which was going to be an addendum to all the existing local authority SCIs. We'd done a lot of work on this right back in 2018 and early 2019, and it was ready for consultation back in early summer last year. But we did have quite a number of issues. So that was essentially, and I think this again leads into understanding the broader context, was that the JSP work stream was quite ahead of all the other work streams effectively, and that created challenges. We were going to be the first to go public with any documentation. So there was quite a bit of debate on that, which eventually resulted in the consultation being delayed by around 6 months. But in that time, we had developed our own website, and we developed a system for online comments. So with the government talking a lot about going digital, I think we're pretty advanced on that side of things. So when we did go out with consultation, it essentially attracted 48 responses, many of which would, you would expect, people like the Port of London Authority, Environment Agency, individual and neighbouring local authorities. There were a few residents groups and individuals, and that brought out how do you communicate with the public about this, because many of those brought out complaints about their own local plans. So it's how do you communicate what a strategic plan is. However, having said that, there was a lot of support overall for a strategic plan to deal with all the various cross-boundary issues that exist in South Essex. Next slide, please. So the issues paper, in terms of producing documentation, we've done a lot of work on actually looking at structure of what the document, overall document that we want to produce is. Not just the issues paper, but looking ahead at broader policy areas. So the issues paper has been a long time in gestation. So yeah, again, we basically had much of it ready about a year ago. But one of the things in producing any plan, local plans as well as strategic plans, is goalposts do move. And so you have to keep pace with what is happening. So we've had to be aware of what is happening with the broader Acela prospectus, which is how the local authorities working together communicate about South Essex to the government and to other investment agencies. So that's so we've been trying to align with that and with the other pieces of work. We've been trying to put it into a really attractive graphics format. If you look at what Oxfordshire have done with theirs, we felt, well, we can learn from that. So we've put that together. We've produced a summary document, and different authorities have written different chapters, which again relates back to the evidence-based work they've been doing. So there's a bit of a follow through there, but we are hoping to consult on the issues paper by the end of the document, by the end of the year, but that's not definitive yet. And one challenge is how we go through the different committee cycles, because as you can imagine, with 6 authorities plus Essex, timing reports and committee cycles does have its challenges. Next one, please. So moving ahead of each chapter, what we've done is done a bit of a tagline to try and set out some of the key challenges or key facts about the area, and then we've got a number of questions for each topic that we're hoping that people will respond to give us a really good picture of what the issues are from different players' perspectives. The next one, please. So what are we covering? Well, we're covering all the key issues that planning authorities need to look at. So economic growth is obviously a key driver. We put that first, and high quality places second, because we really did want to emphasize that. Now you'll see housing comes lower on the list, essentially because we didn't feel that we wanted it at this stage to dominate the whole paper. But clearly with the standard methodology and historically South Essex delivering well below its housing targets, that is a big issue. And will be a controversial issue because, as Mark has already explained, we are all constrained significantly by Greenbelt. So that's essentially how it's structured, with the questions on each of those. Next slide, please. While we've been progressing our document, we've been very aware of what is happening around the rest of the country. Now, I put these authorities down. Now, I would emphasize that some areas have been successful, like the Greater Plymouth area has done a joint local plan across 3 authorities, which has been very successful. A number of other authorities around the country have worked together on joint core strategies, for example, in Greater Nottingham. So there are positives. However, as we've been producing the plan, there seems to have been a lot of challenges coming forward from other places. So the North Essex authorities, which many of you will either work in or know well, have had a number of challenges about how to deliver garden settlements across the 3 authorities to meet their housing needs. And the big issue that's really come across from a quite forensic examination by the inspector is, how do you deal with vision-led documents? How do you deal with something that's got a long time scale? And it's challenging to prove the deliverability and the viability of everything to the detail that's wanted. The West of England, again, another one that we followed closely, is got to examination but failed on a number of issues, in particular the fact that it failed to address reasonable alternatives and really be led by the vision. Essentially, they'd defined growth areas and then developed the plan around those growth areas. So we've been trying to think, well, how do we do that? How do we try and have a clear vision, but recognise where the obvious growth might be? Oxfordshire, tied to the growth deal with the government, there's been a number of issues there about how they deliver that plan. Should it be statutory? What type of document? Some differences between the authorities. Same things happened in Greater Exeter. That was making progress. Then you've got issues around distribution. And Ottlesford again brought out the issue of your distribution of housing. Is it deliverable? Is it viable? Next one, please. So there's been that context, and then there's the broader legislative context. I think one thing that's exercised our mind, and we did have a meeting with PINS about this, is how do you produce a joint strategic plan that covers a number of areas when it's essentially been developed and delivered under local plan legislation, which goes to a high degree of detail. Now, we don't feel that the current legislation is fit for purpose because it requires such a high bar that, yeah, it would be challenging to deliver. I mean, we have been advised by PINS that they would try and make it work, but yeah, that's a challenge for a number of authorities. And obviously, moving forward now with the planning white paper, we've got duty to cooperate being removed, but how do we deal with cross-border issues, which in South Essex are significant? For example, in Southend here, you know, Greater Southend covers 3 authorities. There's a lot of sort of cross-border issues with Basildon and Castle Point, with Thurrock and Basildon and Brentwood. So we can't get away from dealing with it, but how do we deal with it under the new system? So yeah, that's something we're mulling over, and maybe we need to wait until the devolution white paper comes out before we get more clarity on that. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the JSP is the issues paper is currently virtually ready to go. We're still sort of trying to keep it up to date, and also there's the challenge of the staffing time for the graphics. But I think one thing it has brought out is how do we deal with a vision? If you were producing a local plan, then you relate it probably to your local authority vision and try and align that. In South Essex, we have been trying to sort of look at what that vision is, and that's something very much that the chief execs at their level and the overall high level management of a seller have been addressing. We've also, because we've been putting together a prospectus, or the seller authorities have government investment in the area, we've needed to recast the JSP in line with that. And there's also been quite a bit of work with Homes England about developing a pipeline of sites so that we can actually get on with delivering housing numbers in the short term as well as the longer term, because there's quite a lot of market failure and we do need to move that forward. Next slide, please. So a few lessons learned. This is a summary of them. There's a lot. When you're dealing with 7 authorities, there are inevitably some differences where you're trying to align local priorities and emphases with a broader sub-regional approach. I think it'd be fair to say that we work very well together as officers, and there's a lot of mutual respect, and doing the joint evidence-based work has been very good. But some authorities have different perspectives on whether we should emphasise a statutory plan or whether we should go for a more informal plan. Others wanted to work more on their own evidence base rather than on the wider evidence base. So we manage our differences and work well, but you cannot get away from the fact that there will be that to deal with. You do need high level support and coordination. You need a champion who will take what you're doing as a group of planners to both the chief officers, and we do have that to some degree for the project delivery board, but also to the chief execs as well. You've got to have an effective top-down, bottom-up and sideways on way of working. Otherwise, you suddenly find things are happening which you never knew about, and then you have to take that on board. So it is very important to have that. Unfortunately, the chair of the PDB, Project Delivery Board, is also on the joint officer group, so we do get quite a lot of feedback that way. Resourcing is the big issue. I mean, we did get a sizable sum for our planning delivery grant, but that's largely been used on evidence. In terms of staffing, we did have some project delivery support funded through PDG from Essex to start with, but certainly for the last year or so, we've been working virtually solely with members of staff from local planning teams who are already stretched. We've got 3 authorities at or close to examination, and others, the rest of us, who are trying to get our plans moving. So there's an awful lot of pressure to try and deal with the JSP and also hit local plan deadlines. And I think the other one that we're learning is we need greater simplicity in the planning system. The system isn't fit for purpose for JSPs. So what is the way forward in terms of that and the evidence expectations? Next one, please. So I hope that's given you a few thoughts to provoke questions. I'm sure they're all coming in. There's a couple of links there, both to the broader Acela website and also to our mini website. So look forward to the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian, and thank you, Mark. That was a really interesting presentation and actually shows the breadth of work that both Southend, Thurrock and all our adjoining authorities have been doing to put together that joint strategic planning work in association with Essex County Council. So Sue, I'm going to invite you to ask some questions. We've got some questions on the question box, but if you want to ask some questions or just share your reflections, then it's open to you.
Thank you very much. And firstly, a huge thanks to Adrian, to Mark and to yourself, Peter. And I have found this presentation just so interesting. I've been really looking forward to it. But I've written so many notes. So as things sort of came into my mind about what you were talking about. So some of the themes that I've picked up, I think one that really comes through very clearly is the challenge you've got with resources. And that very much connects to the white paper, where they actually talk about the fact that planning has had a 60% cut. Now, to see that in a white paper, an acknowledgement of the resources, really says what incredible work you've done under the pressure that you've been under. And let's hope that changes. I thought the learning, the way you went through the learning and the sort of process, that was really interesting. The positives and the challenges that you've taken from other ways forward, and how you've actually then interpreted that in the South Essex context. And I thought Peter's phrase of the journey from hostility to support, you really explained how that support then appeared and the positives. A couple of things really struck me that I'm sure the questions will come on this, so I'll just sort of put them forward as reflections. The things that jumped out are the importance of strategic planning, and the fact, as you said in one of your slides, the white paper is almost silent on that. I thought also the comment, I think it was Peter who said it to start off with when talking about a sailor, was really it came out of a failure of the duty to cooperate to work. Now, we've lost that duty to cooperate, but really the positives from what you described in strategic planning are so enormous that we've got to somehow make sure we keep those positives. I think that the only sort of question, the thing I'd be particularly interested in terms of your comments sort of before I open to everybody else, is, as you probably expect, you know, community engagement. That's my thing. And I was very much struck that you were talking about doing the next round of consultation very much in a graphics format, a visual format, so as people could actually grasp that because of the difficulties they'd had with interpreting, well, how does that relate to the strategic plan versus the local plan, etc. So it really be just sort of your thoughts as to whether that will, with a 750,000 population and 48 responses, do you think having a visual presentation, which actually does accord with what the white paper is saying about making things more accessible, do you think it will make a difference? And do you think you're now in a better position to be able to communicate those benefits?
Mark or Adrian, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, if I come in quickly there. Yeah, I think it's sort of as echoed by the white paper, really. We really are looking at how we can make this as visual and use the digital tools as best we can. I guess reflection on that is sort of, you know, up and down the country, a lot of sort of the demographic that want to get involved in local plans, sometimes, you know, a bit older and so forth. So how that move to a more digital approach and how that chimes with some of the people that already are feeding into the plan making process. I think we need to unpick a bit more, but absolutely, I think we need to make this as graphical and as open to all residents to really get that feedback. And we've started looking at ways to do that through the web, and making sure we have almost like a sub work stream sitting alongside that really looks at the comms and how we engage, and that's really embedded at that sailor level. We'll be making use of that as we go through the plan making process. But Adrian, if you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I think one thing that came out of the SCI, as I mentioned in the presentation, is many sort of local people saw it as an opportunity for a retake on their gripes on the local plan. So, and most people tend to think local. So it's how do you make a strategic document relevant to people? And as Mark said, we do have there is a separate communications work stream. There's been other work done on trying to get people's views at a broader seller level, which I think still leaves some room for us to grow in getting that out. So I think we do need to think creatively about how we do that and what is the best way forward. And we've got quite a lot of money that we actually put in the budget for consultation. So I don't think it means us going to every village hall in the whole of South Essex, but yeah, I think digital is probably the way forward in some way or shape or form, but it can never replace totally face-to-face as well.
Thank you. I think probably, Peter, there's quite a few questions you said coming in, so if I hand back to you.
Okay, thank you, Sue. I think just to reflect on that point you just made earlier on, I think it is quite right that the plan making process, actually, as is currently constituted, is a very expensive process, particularly in assembling the evidence base. And one of the things we've found is actually, as well as committing the officer time, and all the authorities involved, all the 6 authorities have committed officer time and staff time, but also committed finance and serious amounts of capital to support that work. And you need to do that to move it forward. So the first question I'm going to mention is from Carl Glossop. Some of this has already been touched on, but perhaps the latter part of the question, either Adrian or Mark might want to comment on. And it asks, what do you envisage the impact will be on the JSP resulting from proposals in the planning white paper, which propose to remove the duty to cooperate? And also, is there a recognition in the white paper that larger strategic areas may need to be identified, which could result in joint plans? Do you think this will impact on the 2 tiers of strategic policies in both the JSP and the individual authorities' local plans?
I'll try and start, and Mark might want to add something to this. I think in terms of meeting housing need, some authorities, certainly going forward when you're getting towards the end of the plan period, but some of us earlier, are going to really struggle to meet housing need within the local authority boundaries. And this is probably where the devolution white paper is going to be really important in terms of understanding where the government's thinking is on governance. My honest view is that it will be impossible to avoid some form of duty to cooperate simply to meet housing numbers. And there's some things which you've got to meet. You've got to deal with strategically. Green and blue infrastructure, for example, is another strategic thing. If it's not going to be dealt with formally, I think we deal with it informally, because that's the only way forward. And we probably want to have some form of memorandum of understanding. There's also some settlements, proposed new settlements, which I think will inevitably be cross-border. And therefore we are going to have to take in that bit in the white paper that says deal with strategic scale. So I'll hand it over to Mark.
Yes, just come in. I think it's really sort of what Sue you said at the beginning there is really to focus on the positives of why you're doing strategic planning. Okay, the duty to cooperate will actually go, but actually good planning is about looking at those strategic issues and how you plan beyond your authority area. And I think that'll probably manifest itself in terms of you know, how you attract investment into the area, not at least from government. I think if you're just a single authority looking at things very singular, I think it's going to be a very difficult conversation to have. But having that conversation with group authorities where you're showing you're tackling these big strategic issues, I think you're on a lot stronger footing. The white paper did allude to potentially replacing duty to cooperate with something else, but I guess the devil will be in the detail of what comes forward. But potentially that devolution white paper might play a sort of a big part in that. Yeah, I think that's about it. Oh, and the only thing I was going to raise also is that yeah, obviously the white paper is quite silent on strategic planning, but I guess one of the sort of the biggest issues with that is around the examination process and how the strategic plans at the moment would be examined as a large local plan in the current regulations. So I guess moving to a different examination process that might not be as onerous may actually help get some of these sort of more visionary plans in place. So without mentioning it explicitly, it actually potentially gives a lot more confidence of getting the type of plan that we want really to sit in above the local plans, being that visionary document that can then some of the detail can be picked up in the local plans.
So no discussion would be complete without a mention of Katrina Riddell and her role in promoting strategic planning. So I have a question from Katrina. Good afternoon. And she's asking about the new planning system that's proposed and what impact that might have in terms of the duty to cooperate, which we've already discussed, but also in terms of sustainability assessments and strategic environmental assessments. So do you have a view about what the new planning system will do in relation to those issues and whether it would help or hinder?
I think, as I sort of alluded to at the end there, Peter, having a examination that isn't as onerous should really help in terms of getting strategic plannings in place. I guess what we still have to be mindful of is what we are preparing is still evidence and is still deliverable. It's really about getting that balance right in terms of any examination. In terms of the changes to sustainability appraisals and SEAs, I guess the devil will be in the detail of what replaces that, particularly around looking at alternative sites. But in terms of it, objections to examinations, the SA is often the first port of call. So actually re-looking at that, and obviously it's not really intended, the SA is not really intended for that process. It's about making sure you're delivering sustainable, good quality development. And I think the planning system has sort of lost track of that somewhat. So there could be some real positives there, but I say the devil will be in the detail of what comes forward.
Yeah, a couple of additions to that. One is, if you don't have some form of duty to cooperate, it doesn't stop other neighbouring authorities objecting to your plan. So I think you would want to have some mechanism in place to address that anyway, because you want to drive forward delivery. I think SA, the danger is that it's become very procedural and very detailed. But at the same time, and this going back to the question about consultation, we've seen the climate change agenda become much more important. That's what many of the public are engaged in. We need to be able to demonstrate that the plan is sustainable and that it has taken into account climate change scenarios. So I don't think we can get away from that. We just need to probably reinvent it in such a way that is more proportionate and targeted.
Okay, the next question is about how the Joint Strategic Plan relates to local plans. And this is from Sam Metzen. And he asks, how do you expect the latter stages of the consultation process or the plan preparation for the Joint Strategic Plan to relate to the timetables for local plan preparation in South Essex, particularly Thurrock? And will they be prepared in tandem?
I think this has been quite a source of debate amongst the authorities, because as Mark mentioned, we have 3 authorities at a very advanced stage of plan preparation at or close to inquiries, and we've got 3 of the authorities who are at the initial stages, and you have the government as saying we want local plans in place by 2023 or you will be sanctioned. So I know that has concentrated the mind of many authorities. That's where it goes back to resources. So how we align the JSP with the local plans is an ongoing problem in South Essex. I think all we can do and all we're trying to do is to reflect as much as possible where the existing authorities that are advanced are at, and to work closely between ourselves on aligning the evidence base for the local plans with the JSP evidence. And there'll be discussions on the consultation periods as well.
Yeah, and
Okay.
of course the JSP will be, be setting out a long-term planning framework. And there's obviously the requirement of local plans to be reviewed every 5 years. So some of those plans at later stages will be reviewed in 5 years anyhow. So obviously be mindful of the sort of the guiding principles that we're looking to set as part of the strategic plan.
Okay, well, getting tight for time now, so I'm going to combine two questions, and they're from Stuart Wilshire and Charles Good. So will the joint strategic plan identify strategic allocations for housing and employment sites? And what is the ultimate time frame for the adopted plans? And combining with a question about the green belt. So it's asking about a strategic green belt review and whether each authority is doing their own review. So do you want to combine those questions and pick them up?
Yeah, in terms of timeframes, we're looking at 2038, but we've had quite a lot of discussion around whether we should be looking at 2050 and looking ahead to that. The challenge is getting evidence base sufficiently detailed to actually look at that, and with COVID and trying to scenario gaze on things at the moment is a big challenge. So yeah, we are looking at a 2038 time frame. In terms of greenbelt, yeah, we're definitely looking at doing a strategic greenbelt review. Each of the individual authorities have also been doing their own. There is a bit of an overlap that we're trying to cover in what should the strategic greenbelt actually cover, and also link that in with the need to improve the greenbelt to enhance as well as just to restrict growth. I'll hand over.
Yeah, I think part of the questions around setting out where we identify strategic sites, I think that's still to be how we actually articulate that in the plan. Is still to come, but absolutely, it's meant to be a spatial plan. So in terms of anything of a strategic importance or strategic scale, we'll need to identify spatially, whether that's a key diagram, akin to what we used to have in core strategies or regional plans, how we do that to then provide the overriding principles for these strategic sites and other strategic issues for then the local plan to then pick up the detail.
Okay, thank you, Mark. We're drawing to a close now in terms of the session, but I'd just like to say to Sue, thank you for joining us in South Essex. I also want to say a heartfelt and personal well done in terms of your year as president. I know it's been incredibly difficult, and I cannot imagine the circumstances arising where you've had to go through. Great goodwill as well in terms of the year that you've done, and we're delighted that you could join us. Sadly not in person, but actually virtually. And I hope it's given you a flavour of what we've been doing in South Essex. I did think of the title, Strategic Planning the Only Way in South Essex, with a little bit of tongue-in-cheek. My children are great fans of TOWIE. I honestly don't get it. I don't get it. But what I do get is the importance of strategic planning and the value that strategic planning has and will continue to have, and the great work that we've been doing in terms of local authorities working across regions, sub-regions, areas to actually deliver it. And whatever the white paper holds for us, I am confident that we as a planning profession, because I always want to distinguish the planning profession from planning systems, that we will deliver whatever it is we have to deliver in the system that we have to work in. So I'm very confident for the future in terms of us as professional planners. But I'm going to leave the final word for you, Sue, and then I'll close if you wanted a final word.
Thank you, and thank you so much. I mean, it has been my privilege and my pleasure to join you. I really feel quite buzzy and enthusiastic from what I've heard. But just to pick up very quickly on what you mentioned about planning, the phrase you used to use, Peter, planning matters. I use it quite a lot as well. The white paper uses it. Now, isn't that an achievement? So the government recognising planning matters, we are set good if we can just influence in the right way. So thank you so much. I think the work that you've done will be a tremendous part of demonstrating really, really good planning.
Well, thank you to everyone that's joined us again. Thank you, Sue. And as I understand it, this recording will be available shortly on the Institute's YouTube website. So thank you to everybody. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Try not to get too much sunburn. And thank you to my team and to the colleagues working across the 6 authorities for all your hard work. I, as a senior officer, do appreciate it, and I know that my colleagues do. Have a good day. Thank you very much.